Hey, it's Greg Brown. Grab your logbook, because it's time for Flying Carpet Podcast Flight number 24, Red Sports Car for a Day. I'm an aviation author, adventure columnist, photographer, and former National Flight Instructor of the Year. The Flying Carpet is a 4-place, single-engine light airplane. In it, my wife Jean and I have long traveled the North American continent, searching behind clouds for the real America and experiencing aerial adventures like today's all along the way. Learn more at my website, gregbrownflyingcarpet.com, where you can also see photos from this episode. And I welcome your questions and feedback via my Cockpit Adventures from the Flying Carpet podcast Facebook group. Okay, everyone, hop aboard my flying carpet, snug up your seatbelts, and prepare for takeoff on today's adventure. Red Sports Car for a Day. Clear prop. Like most teens of my era, I was obsessed with cars, though unlike others who favored tire-squealing Mustangs, Camaros, and GTOs, my own tastes ran more toward old autos and sports roadsters. It probably started with a high school friend, I'll call him Brad, who gleaned more adventures from his string of oddball old cars than most kids did from far cooler rides. A squat, muscular guy, Brad had a bad boy sense of adventure like few others I knew, a naturally dark expression, and to those who chafed him, a confrontational manner. But beneath it all was a warm heart and a good friend. Brad's first car was a 1959 bathtub Rambler. As I remember, the homely vehicle ended up abandoned in a field. Next came a column shift 2-stroke Saab 93, where you had to mix oil with the gas. Look up a photo and you'll see those early Saabs were not cool in the sense of the later cult-favored 900s, but they were just plain weird. Our most memorable exploits, however, were conducted in Brad's Turtleback 1950 Plymouth, including ditching high school phys ed class to cruise town in our gym shorts, and a memorable late-night 3-hour drive to Madison, Wisconsin to treat some girls to a drive-in movie. Officially, I stayed over at his house that night, quote-unquote, to study for the SAT. Needless to say, my score the next morning was less than exemplary. Then there was the time when a carload of toughs threw a rock through the rear window of Brad's subsequent befinned 56 Plymouth while we were parked roadside at the local swimming quarry. My friend waited until the culprits reversed course to inspect their handiwork, at which point he grabbed the tire jack from his trunk and tossed it through the passing car's windshield. We did not wait around to chat, but I do remember he had a heck of a time finding a replacement jack for the old car. Shortly afterward, I bought a low-mileage 1939 Chevy and headed off to the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where I'd soon earn my pilot certificate. After the demise of Brad's 56 Plymouth, he hitched up from Chicago to see a stable of old cars I'd discovered in nearby Stoughton. To my surprise, Brad bought a rust-free 41 Studebaker Commander business coupe on the spot and drove it off homeward. I later learned that when he aired up the tires on his way home, the car listed to one side. It turned out the seller had overinflated the tires on one side and underinflated those on the other side to obscure sagging springs. Later, Brad discovered that STP had apparently been added to the engine to thicken the oil and minimize telltale exhaust smoke from worn-out rings. Sadly, he was soon forced to junk that car. Following 2 years of worthy adventures in my '39 Chevy, the old car's 55-mile-per-hour maximum speed became tiresome. Plus, I worried that my baby would rust away in Wisconsin's unforgiving winters. Then one day, a rear axle bearing seized on Interstate 94 between Milwaukee and Madison, spewing smoke from a rear wheel and forcing me to hitchhike home. Finding replacement bearings for the old car took weeks. So I sold my beloved Chevy and set my heart on getting an idiosyncratic Volvo P1800S sports car, like the one driven by Roger Moore in the Saint television series. After much searching, I found a fire-engine red 67 coupe in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, with 4-speed transmission, overdrive, and a claimed 60,000 miles. The question was how to get there to see it. Now, my younger brother Alan and our childhood buddy Paul had already qualified as private pilots while still in high school. So I hitchhiked home to Chicago, and from there Paul flew me to Sheboygan in a Grumman Traveler. Having been away at school, I asked Paul after takeoff about his recent flying adventures. Most consisted of short lunch hops consistent with a high schooler's budget. But then Paul boasted of how he and Alan had recently flown 2 Cessna 172s filled with high school pals to the Lake Geneva, Wisconsin Playboy Club. As we traced Lake Michigan's sea and sand shoreline, he revealed the juicy details. We had planned to fly up in formation, Paul explained. So I took off first and flew slow cruise until Alan and crew could catch up. Back in those pre-GPS days, we'd plotted a magnetic course for Lake Geneva, and upon meeting up proceeded full throttle at 2,500 feet. It was a perfect flying day, so we easily spotted Lake Geneva from miles away, and referencing the sectional chart, had no problem finding the club's private strip. After we landed, the club sent a limo down to the runway to pick us up, probably assuming we were high rollers from Chicago. I can't imagine they'd have admitted us if we hadn't flown in. When we arrived at the club itself, the maitre d', a big guy, took one look at all us high school kids and said, "Okay, guys, you can enjoy a hamburger here in the restaurant, and you can go in the billiards room, but you can't go into any other rooms." Paul told me he wondered at the time, what do they have in those other rooms? He laughed. All the guys giggled as Playboy bunnies served our meals. Alan and I were heroes for the rest of the school year. About this time, Sheboygan County Memorial Airport appeared in our windshield, and my young friend executed a picture-perfect landing. The Volvo's seller awaited us in the airport parking lot, and when the car proved to be a cream puff, I sent Paul home, wrote a check for every penny I had, and launched in my new-to-me sport coupe for Madison. The fun lasted all of 38 miles until I stopped to refuel at Fond du Lac. There, more to savor ownership of my new red sports car than any other reason, I checked the oil. None showed on the dipstick. Alarmed, I phoned the seller, who claimed the car had never leaked nor burned oil. So I added several quarts and continued. When I arrived 75 miles home to Madison, however, the oil was again off the stick. The engine didn't appear to be leaking, which suggested worn piston rings or other expensive problems. Brad's Studebaker fiasco was still fresh in my mind, and having spent every penny buying the Volvo, I knew paying for any major repairs was out of the question. Fortunately, it was a Sunday, so the seller had not yet cashed my check. I phoned him to say I was stopping the check and invited him to come retrieve the P1800. He did so the next morning. Disappointed as I was about not keeping my dream car, I now look back with pride and frankly wonder that at 19 years old I had the guts to return it. Anyway, after just one day savoring that red sports car, I ended up inheriting my mom's well-worn 65 Chrysler convertible. That turned out to be not all bad, however. Although briefly disheartened, I'd subconsciously experienced an epiphany. Yes, I'd recently earned my own pilot certificate, but this flight with Paul was the first time I'd shared a cockpit with a friend around my own age. Yes, I'd aviated since childhood with my dad. But although enjoying our destinations, I'd experienced little real passion to fly. Probably it was because kids in those days were mostly relegated to the back seat. But tracing sparkling Lake Michigan shoreline under Paul's command on such an exciting mission changed everything. The joy of skimming silvery sand and azure waters with my friend, and the associated sense of mission had opened my mind to the possibilities of piloting. Yes, I learned to appreciate the Chrysler, but more importantly, the money I'd saved by not buying the Volvo would now finance flying adventures. Long afterward, I asked Paul, soon to retire as a major airline captain, to look up our decades-ago flight. Amazingly, he remembered flying me to pick up the car some 45 years earlier. "It was some kind of Swedish car, right?" he said, "and it had fins." He retrieved his first logbook while I waited on the phone. "Okay, Greg, this must be it. March 25th, 1973. AA-5 aircraft. DuPage to Sheboygan to DuPage. 2.5 hours logged and a crosswind landing. That gave me a total of 62.1 hours. Now I've got 20,103. As we laughingly relived that youthful adventure, I was reminded of its lasting lesson. Who needs a sports car when we get to fly airplanes? Thanks for joining me reliving my youthful airplane and auto adventures in today's episode, Red Sports Car for a Day. Piloting is not just about being in the air, but also about where it takes us. I welcome your questions and feedback at my Cockpit Adventures from the Flying Carpet podcast Facebook group. Please share your favorite Flying Carpet episodes on social media, post reviews on your favorite podcast directories, and treat the Flying Carpet to a gallon of avgas via my Greg Brown Flying Carpet website. Thanks in advance for your support. If you enjoyed this story, you'll appreciate my book, Flying Carpet, The Soul of an Airplane, for which I was named Barnes & Noble Arizona Author of the Month. Learn about that and my other aviation books at gregbrownflyingcarpet.com. Also at gregbrownflyingcarpet.com, you'll find my views from the Flying Carpet aerial photography, available in fine art metal prints and pilot achievement plaques. Follow my social media sites, most of which can be found by searching Greg Brown Flying Carpet. And consider joining my Student Pilot Pep Talk group on Facebook. Again, thanks for joining me on today's Flying Carpet Cockpit Adventure. Music by Hannes Brown. See you next time.